are here in the Haftr Media Lab, learning the Sefer Pituchei. So, Chavra, let's get started. All right. This week is Parshas Mitzora, and today we're going to discuss the topic of Geulas Yisrael. And where does Geula come from? The Geula of redemption of Klal Yisrael. B'tzchus Haftr. You got to hear these beautiful words of Rabbeinu Yaakov Avichatzira. So let's get started. Zois Hatorah l'chol nega hatzaras v'lanesak. This is the Torah. These are the laws of every nega tzaras, and for a nesak, a different type of a nega. Now, Klal Yisrael has been around for a long time, Baruch Hashem, but we haven't had, we've had our fair share of galus. And the Medrash is meramas to the galus and the different types of nega that you can have. So, for instance, the Medrash says, se'es, they have a se'es, a pachas, beheres, nega tzaras, se'es zubavel. And there's psukim why se'es zubavel. Sapachas zumadai. The beheres, that's referring to Yavan. Nega tzaras, the concept of a nega tzaras, zu edai. Now, the Arba Malchias of what we Jews have to deal with for the past, couple of years. What's the idea? How do we get into this? How do we get out of this? So the Medrash is keying us in here that it's an inyan of tzaras, it's an inyan of nega. The Arizal says that each of the Dalet Goliath actually correspond to a different shem, a different letter in the Shem Havaya. So, for instance, the Yud corresponds to Galus Bavel. The Hey corresponds to Galus of Madai. The Vav corresponds to the Galus of Yavan. And the final Hey corresponds to the Galus of Edom. That means, so to speak, that each one of these of Galus, of exiles that we've been through, affected a different letter in the Shem Hashem. The Arizal also writes that the final galus, which we're in, the galus of Edom, is actually divided into two parts. There are two nations, two issues that we have to deal with. It's Edom, and it's also Yishmael. And that's what we find. Presently speaking, we get it hit from both sides. We have Edom to deal with, and we have Yishmael. So Biaka says, there's a remez into this, because the shame, the Eke, which is a heel, equals 172. The Shem Elikim, which is din, which is dinim, which is difficulties, which is tsaris, that equals 86. 86 times 2 is 172. The days where we're in, which means that there are two dinim, in the Akev, in the heel, which is the final galus. At the end of galus, we're going to have to deal with two things, with Edom and Yishmael. Two Shemas of Elikim, two HaKadosh Baruch Hu being master himself. And this galus is being referred to as Ikvasa de Mashiach. Ikvasa de Mashiach is like the footsteps of Mashiach. But it's referred to as Ikvasa. Ikvasa is really akevos, it's heels in the plural. It's not the Akev of Mashiach, it's Ikvasa. Because it's Edom and Yishmael. It's not just one that we have to suffer from, but it's Edom and Yishmael. That's the galus of Edom, the final galus that we're in. Now, the remez that we find here, this is from last week's parasha. Adam kiyeh ba'ar b'sareh, if a person has in his flesh, se'esei sapachas, oivaheres, v'haya ba'ar b'sareh l'neget zaras. So he said these are the galus that we refer to, se'esei sapachas, be'eres, and neget zaras. So what happens? Says Rabbi Yaakov, look at those letters. V'haya is the same letters as Yud Kei Vav Kei. Because when we're talking about tzaras, we're talking about the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei being in galus as well. Each one of the galus correspond to a different letter of the Shem Havaya. And the negats of V'haya ba'ar V'haya means the Shem Havaya, so to speak, will be a negat tzaras, will be in galus. Now, how do you get out of this? We're in negat tzaras, so what's the remedy? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is meramis to us in the negat tzaras itself, the remedy Neged Tzaras. If you look at the Rashi Tevis, the first letter of each word, and the Seifei Tevis, the last letter of each word of Nega and Tzaras, so you get a Nun, a Rashi Tevis are Nun and Saf. The Seifei Tevis are Ayin and Sadik. That gives you together 610 plus 1 for the Koil gives you 611. Torah is 611. So the premise here is that V'hoya l'Neged Tzaras is a Neged Tzaras. But Neged Tzaras teaches us what the remedy is. And that's a focus on Torah. That's Shmir Torah, keeping the Torah and learning the Torah, Limud Torah. Now, if we have the Torah, we got 3 more letters left. The other 3 letters are Gimel, Reish, Ayin. So Yigra means to subtract. Through Torah, then with Megareya, we subtract from the Neged Tzaras. We are able to subtract from the galus. Look at this Gavaldik Gemara in Bava Basra. The Gemara says that someone who puts taxes on Talmidei Chachamim, so they're over on what it says in the Torah, on the Nevi'im and Kesuvim. So the Gemara, we're going to pick up in the middle. The Gemara says, Ad Nevi'im. Where do you see that you're over on what it says in the Nevi'im? D'chsev, because the Pasuk writes, Gam ki yisnu v'goyim ata akabetzim v'yochlu ma'at mimasa melech v'sar. So Amr Ula explains, how should you read this Pasuk? Pasuk Zev Lashon Ramis Namar. The word ki yitnu, you should read it as an Aramaic word. And if it's used in Aramaic, how do you say to learn? We know Tani or Tanya. To learn in a Brisa, Tanan. The word Tana is an author of a Brisa, of a Mishnah. So Yisnu means to learn. So he says, Ki Yisnu V'Goyim. If Itanu Kulu, all of Klal Yisrael will learn Torah. Listen to this. You gotta hear this. Itanu, this is a Gemara. Itanu, if the Yidden will learn Torah when they're in galus, Ata akabetzim, I will gather them in right now. If it's only some of them, so then at least they shouldn't be burdened by the taxes of the king and the government. But you hear that? Itanu, if Klal Yisrael learns, Itanu kulu ata akabetzim, I will gather them in. Torah will be megareya from the Neged Tzaras, from the galus. Vaita says Rabbi Yaakov, Tzion b'mishpat yipada, v'shaveh b'tzedakah. Tzion, Yerushalayim will be redeemed, b'mishpat, v'shaveh, and those who return to her, b'tzedakah. What's mishpat and tzedakah? You know how HaKadosh Baruch Hu refers to the Torah when he's talking to Avraham Avinu? You know what he calls it? He calls the Torah Mishpat Tzedakah. He says, Kiyadativ. He says, Avram, you know what I love about you? Because I know, you will command your sons and your household after him. Vishamru derech Hashem, they will keep the derech Hashem. La'asei tzedakah mishpat, to keep tzedakah and mishpat. What's tzedakah mishpat? That's the Torah. Says Rabbi Yaakov, tzedakah mishpat, zu ha-Torah. Tzedakah mishpat with the kail is 629. Zu ha-Torah 629. Tzedakah mishpat. It's through Torah that we will get out of this galus, chevra. We got to learn Torah. Oh, it's such a pain. We got to do it. That's how we get out of here. Let's go bring it back to our pasuk. Zois ha-Torah l'chol nega tzaras v'lanesek. Zois ha-Torah. If you want to get out of the nega tzaras, the Arizal told us that nega tzaras is Edom, is the final galus, which is made up of both the ikvas and the Mashiach. If you want to get out of it, ula vilana sake is the lashon of menatik, to unburden yourself. The way that's going to happen is through Torah. So chavra, let's do it. Let's learn Torah, and in the schus of our Torah learning, we should be zeicha to be his girl tzaddik b'mehira v'yameinu. Amen. Have a great Shabbos.